moves? What are the things that we can do that are going to make a real difference? We actually have an incredible upper hand in moral and religious power. By every major tradition, we're right and they're wrong. But we have to be willing to engage in the conversations. We can engage in the conversations where people are at. It's why I love talking to people on the religious right. I am happy to engage in that conversation. But we have to be willing to. And we have to be thoughtful about how we're applying moral power. Occupy Wall Street did a phenomenal job. I want to hug every occupier in the entire country, I swear to God. They did a great job of completely changing the conversation from deficits to inequality, which we needed to have happen. And they did it through an effective application of moral power. But if I have one more person tell me that the answer to all of our problems is a march on Washington, D.C., that's not actually an effective application of moral power. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be part of a much broader effective application of moral power as it was in the civil rights movement, but you have to do all the other stuff first. Cultural power, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. We've seen in 6 years how much of a difference those stories can make for an issue that we care about. There are all kinds of ways to tell stories. You can make art or posters, you can write short stories, you can tell actual personal stories, you can write novels, you can, I don't know if any television producers, you can produce your own television show. There are all kinds of ways to do it, but changing the stories in people's heads. Even so, the effort that Dan Savage led around It Gets Better was all about people telling stories, right, on video. That while it's incredibly hard to be gay when you're a teenager, it gets better as you get older. And as people told those stories, it not only helped all of the kids who were feeling isolated and hopeless, but it also changed in a lot of people's minds the perception of who are gay people, what does it mean, how many of them are there around me. The more we encourage folks to come out of the closet, the more normal it seems. The more people say they're Mormon, big side of the words, right? The more normal it seems. The fact that virtually all of Hollywood is liberal is probably to our advantage. We should think about using it more. Political power. So they've rigged the rules in both elections and in governance, but there are actually more of us than there are of them. So let's take a notion that the right would no doubt describe as horrifically socialist. Let's take the idea, hypothetically speaking, that, okay, what if the government guaranteed enough food, housing, and health care to every single person in the country? Right? Anybody want to take a guess as to what percentage of Americans think that the government ought to do that? Roughly.
20? 60? I think it's closer to 55.
Two-thirds. Two-thirds of Americans think the government ought to guarantee enough food, housing, and health care to every person. Two-thirds!
Yeah.
They're on our side. 90% of the country thinks that we should not cut Social Security and Medicare, even if it means we have to raise taxes on rich people. 90%. I think technically it's like 80-90%. But that's not just Democrats. That's not just Democrats and independents. That's most Republicans. They're on our side. There are more of us than there are of them. We just need to get organized. The military, the fact that they have destroyed their relationship with the military is an opportunity for us. And coming from a military family, not only my dad was in the Air Force, but my husband was in the Army, my brother-in-law who was in the Army, my brother just retired after 20 years in the Army, was part of the initial base force in Iraq, my other brother was in the Army. It's kind of a military family. My dad really wanted me to go to the Air Force Academy. I was a terrible disappointment. But we can make inroads into the military and military families. We've tended to look at the economic stuff sort of head on as though the intractability of that problem is hopeless. But there are things that we can do. I think that Elizabeth Warren running for Senate is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I'm very happy about that. And there's this question of what it is that's broken about the economy. I said earlier that the country's getting wealthier. It continues to get wealthier. And that the problem is that all of that money is going into a few pockets instead of many. We see businesses going out of business around here and very few new businesses successfully starting. What is it that's broken? The single biggest thing that's broken, and I'll walk you through it, right, rather than simply going straight to the punchline. Businesses can't get investment to start or grow. Anyone who's been trying to start a business has seen that, right? It's incredibly difficult to get investment right now. Even venture capitalists who have money to invest aren't investing it right now. Okay, why are they not investing it in the new growth businesses? Because we aren't doing IPOs anymore. Typically, the venture capital model is you invest in 10 things. 8 of them will fail, 2 of them will work, but the 2 that do work will go to IPO and pay for the investments in all of them. So you see this real cycle of growth. But now, when there aren't any IPOs, there's no way for them to ever earn their money back. So they're not making the investments. Okay, why are there not IPOs? There aren't any IPOs because
That's an initial public offering.
initial public offering, right? That's where they take a company public and sell stock to the public.
That's where the company actually gets its money. The rest is just playing around.
That's
with shares.
exactly
You're
right.
raising public stock.
Yeah, that's right. You're raising money by selling public stock, right? So why is that not happening anymore? That's not happening anymore because 75% of all of the investment capital in the United States is now tied up in large capitalization stocks, the biggest companies in the world, in high-frequency trading on Wall Street. What that means is that companies like Goldman Sachs have computers that sit on the New York Stock Exchange. And if I'm going to sell a share of stock in my retirement, my IRA, and I'm willing to sell it at $25 or any price higher, then Alex is going to buy it for her retirement IRA, and she's willing to buy it at $25.10 or any price lower than that. Normally, we'd compromise at $25.05, everybody's happy. What Goldman Sachs does is their computer, a fraction of a second before Alex can buy it from me, buys it from me at the lowest possible price, sells it to her at the highest possible price, pockets the difference, adds no value. 75, and by the way, that makes both of us poorer, makes all of you poorer, and 75% of all of the investment capital in the United States is tied up in that instead of being invested in the next generation of jobs and the next generation of companies, in growing the real economy. 75%. That's
gambling.
It's
That's
gambling.
all it is.
That's what's actually broken about our economy. That's the single biggest thing that's actually broken about our economy.
It's not actually gambling when they get the money from the federal government if they lose.
Yeah, I mean, the rules are incredibly rigged, right? Incredibly rigged against us. We have to unrig them. Bankers, not local bankers, New York bankers, really are the bad guys in all of this. They're destroying the economy because it's profitable for them. They know they're destroying the economy in the future of this country, and they don't care because it's marginally more profitable for them. It would be fairly straightforward to fix. Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, very smart guy, is a big advocate of what's called a Tobin tax, which is a fraction of a cent tax on every one of those transactions, which would essentially eliminate high-frequency trading and force that money to be invested in the actual growth of the United States economy, which I'm all for.
And what do you call that tax?
The Tobin tax?
Tobin,
Tobin, T-O-B-I-N.
Okay.
Tobin, T-O-B-I-N. I'm for a Tobin tax. Not just because it would raise revenue, but more importantly because it would structurally start to fix the economy. All right, we have a problem on our side, which is we have some Trojan horses. People who claim to be Democrats, we're not. And they dilute our brand and our ability to get anything done. They confuse the American people in terms of who we actually are and what we stand for. A handful of them, Blue Dogs. So the Blue Dogs are the most conservative caucus in Congress. Ideologically speaking, there are, for all intents and purposes, and they're the most conservative Democratic caucus in Congress. The Democrats have three basic caucuses, or just groups of members. The Blue Dogs on the right, they don't even vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. They're not Democrats. The New Democrats in the middle, who tend to be socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus on the left, were the people that I was working for when I was back in D.C. The Progressive Caucus is actually the largest of those three groups. They have roughly 80 members in the House and the Senate. They're also the only one of those groups that has members in both the House and the Senate. In 2010, you will hear from people that it's going to be easier to elect a centrist in a swing district than it's going to elect somebody who's progressive. I have some counter data points for you. In 2010, in all of these swing districts all over the country, we had Blue Dogs running in some, we had progressives running in some. The right didn't run moderate Republicans. They ran crazy right-wing people, Tea Party people, in these districts, right? The Congressional Progressive Caucus, at the beginning of the cycle, had 82 members, and at the end of the cycle had 79. We lost 3 seats total. The Blue Dogs went into the cycle with 53 members and came out of the cycle with 21.
Yeah.
The American public is tired of corporate sellouts. And running a corporate sellout under the guise of them being a centrist is a great way for us to lose a swing district. If we want to win, we have to get people excited, which is what the Republicans did. When we lost in 2010, we didn't lose because people switched sides. We lost because our people didn't show up and their people were excited and did. If we want to win, hypothetically speaking, an evenly divided district like the New Washington one, hypothetically speaking, it would be helpful if we could get voters excited. That's going to be necessary. If our voters are excited, we stand a much better chance than if they're not. Does that make sense? And by the way, there's a study, the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, which is sort of the granddaddy of Clintonian triangulation, has a think tank called the Progressive Policy Institute. I find the name very ironic. But the Progressive Policy Institute released a study in August of this last year that showed that it costs twice as much to elect a centrist as it does a progressive. Twice as much. I'm pretty sure that doesn't mean it's easier to elect